For over a decade, South Africa's transport sector was haunted by a silent war, one waged not with competition, but with bullets, bribes, and At the heart of it stood Bonke Makalala, a former taxi driver turned feared kingpin. From the dusty streets of Somo to the major corridors linking Cape Town and the Eastern Cape, his rise was legendary and deadly. Publicly, he was a community hero. Privately, investigators claim he led a violent empire that terrorized bus operators and silenced rivals. Now, after years of chaos, his story is finally unfolding inside a courtroom. This isn't just about one man's fall, it's about a transport system on trial, and the verdict could change the course of South Africa's roads forever. Bonke Makalala first climbed behind the wheel of an old taxi in 2008 near Komani's dusty verge. He drove dawn to midnight, memorizing potholes, passengers' tales, and every shortcut through scattered townships. Each fare paid a small debt and fed a larger dream that no one yet suspected. While other drivers joked at ranks, he scribbled numbers on receipts and studied crowded route maps. Ambition sat silent beside him, waiting for the first green light toward power. 5 years later, in 2013, Makalala signed for a quantum that would change his fate. He named it Unit 1 and painted his phone number in red on both sliding doors. Within weeks, queues formed because his rides left on time, even when seats were empty. Profits climbed, and he reinvested every rand, buying tires, uniforms, and a second permit. Makalala Trans, a company in name only, began to appear on receipts and whisper through the ranks. By the summer, he held keys to 6 taxis, each running a different village circuit before sunrise. Drivers he once rivaled now took wages from him, wearing shirts striped with the company initials. He studied traffic counts, shifted schedules, and cut into territory older bosses guarded for decades. When complaints rose, he smiled, paid fines, and returned with 2 vehicles the following week. Soon, 26 minibuses, 5 coaches, and a handful of cargo trucks carried his blue logo. Growth quickly spread beyond roads, pushing him into funeral services where his vans doubled as hearses by night. He opened a cleaning crew that scrubbed municipal offices, then won contracts in construction along gravel lanes. Each venture fed the next, creating cash that never left his grasp. Bank managers welcomed him with coffee. Politicians posed for photos at ribbon cuttings he financed. To the world, he looked like success born of grit, but darkness already pressed at the edges. In Somo, heavy floods once swept a young girl from a broken bridge, and the village mourned. Government crews promised repairs, then vanished, leaving children to wade waist-deep when storms returned. Makalala arrived with cement bags, hired idle men, and built a new slab before cameras and cheers. The act bought him saint's status. Newspapers dubbed him the Good Samaritan of Somo's backroads. Yet even the fresh concrete felt like a stage where he rehearsed a larger, hidden play. Folks praised his generosity during market days, and children waved when his convoy flushed through town. But in whispered corners, men spoke of late-night meetings, sealed envelopes, and strangers who never returned home. Farmers recalled seeing headlights perched on hills, watching rival taxis like wolves track cattle. Police responded to small fires, punctured tires, and shattered windscreens. Yet files gathered dust without answers. Every unanswered report made his smile wider, proof that fear could be bought as easy as petrol. South Africa's taxi wars are silent until they explode, and Makalala learned to pull fuses unseen. He mapped choke points on routes into Entitha and Cape Town, squeezing rivals by adjusting his own timetables. Passengers followed cheaper fares in punctual vans, rival income shrank, tempers rose, shots followed. Rumors placed him at strategy sessions where elders once mediated but now feared speaking above whispers. Each victory gave him another slice of roadway, stitched together into an empire no map displayed. By 2020, shells of taxis lay on shoulders like warning signs, and police chalk lines faded in rain. Survivors spoke of masked men, trigger squeezes, and engines set ablaze before dawn smelled of diesel. No one named the boss in daylight, yet every whisper curved back to the man in the blue suit. Funeral parades trailed through towns he once gifted with bridges, now carrying victims of route ambushes. Grief turned into hush money. Widows received envelopes, and new drivers signed contracts before graves cooled. Makalala's reach stretched from taxi ranks to city councils, where permits were stamped without review. He loaned sound systems to festivals, yet behind stage curtains, negotiators bargained for silence, not music. If a competitor hesitated, side mirrors cracked overnight, and clients awoke to broken glass sparkling on tar. Police counted incidents but filed them as isolated, missing the web that linked every broken windshield. In that gap of oversight, the Kingpin built walls of intimidation higher than any courtroom door. By early 2023, Bonke Makalala stood astride two identities, Saint of Somo and Shadow Lord of Highways. Every success story carried an echo of fear, like the hum of tires before a sudden burst. He believed no law could touch him because roots were his veins and money his shield. Yet, each burned bus and silenced witness added weight to files growing thick on distant detective desks. The road ahead seemed endless, but the engine of justice had already started, rolling closer with quiet diesel. In early 2021, the first rang out on a quiet highway outside Cape Town. An Intercape bus swerved as bullets tore through the side panel, sending passengers ducking behind their seats. At first, police treated it as an isolated incident, an act of random violence on a dangerous stretch of road. But the bullets kept coming, and each new attack followed a chilling pattern. Within 2 years, over 150 separate incidents had shaken the company to its core. Drivers reported strange vehicles tailing them for miles, headlights always in the mirrors, always too close. Depots were hit with firebombs at midnight, the flames lighting up the dark like warnings no one could ignore. Staff arrived to find buses burnt and the air thick with smoke, their hands trembling as they clocked in. Passengers began canceling trips, afraid they might not make it to their destination alive. By 2022, the fear had become part of the daily routine. In April that year, the violence reached a horrifying new level. Intercape driver Mzwandile Matrana was sitting inside his bus at the company's Cape Town depot, preparing for the next long-haul trip. A man walked up, raised a gun, and 15 times through the windshield before disappearing into the street. Matrana, still strapped into his seat, bled out before help could arrive. He died in hospital 4 days later, and his sent a shockwave through the entire long-distance transport industry. The CCTV footage from that morning became evidence and a warning. It showed the gunman approaching calmly, as if the attack was just another part of his schedule. After the shots, he vanished into the early light without even running. There was no struggle, no attempt to cover his face, only the cold certainty of someone who knew nothing would stop him. The footage left no doubt. This was not chaos. It was strategy. At Intercape headquarters, staff locked doors, checked over shoulders, and lowered their voices in meetings. Drivers shared videos of suspicious cars, license plates half covered with tape, following their routes for hours. Mechanics inspecting buses after trips found broken taillights and bullet holes that hadn't been there at departure. Dispatch logs showed patterns, attacks mainly on Cape Town to Eastern Cape routes, the most profitable corridors in the network. The timing, the targets, the frequency, none of it looked random anymore. Behind closed doors, company executives started connecting what police had failed to see. These were not scattered crimes, but a campaign, one that was organized, timed, and relentless. CEO Johan Ferreira, once silent for fear of making things worse, stepped into the light with a public warning. He accused the government of failing to act, of watching from the sidelines while illegal business was hunted like prey. His voice cracked with frustration, but the message was clear. Intercape was under attack, and those in power were ignoring it. The company submitted official complaints to provincial authorities, to national departments, to police headquarters. They provided evidence, testimonies, dates, and damage reports, but nothing changed. Each week brought another ambush, another bus forced off the road, another family too afraid to travel. Employees stopped wearing uniforms on the way to work, hoping to blend in, hoping not to be noticed. The fear moved from the roads into their homes. As the death toll rose and investigations stalled, Intercape began its own quiet inquiry. Internal investigators traced suspicious activity back to the taxi industry, especially on routes where minibus taxis had been losing passengers. Interviews and surveillance pointed to a single purpose behind the terror: control. Intercape offered reliable, cheaper alternatives on long-distance travel, and some taxi bosses saw it as a threat to their power. To protect their monopoly, they were ready to destroy the competition. Police started to pay closer attention when the pattern became undeniable. Tips from informants inside the taxi ranks whispered the same name over and over again: Bonke Makalala. Known already for his grip on minibus routes, he was now suspected of something far more dangerous. His reach wasn't just in the taxi business. It stretched into targeted violence, into strategic attacks meant to shut down a rival completely. The man once praised for fixing a village bridge was now at the center of a growing nightmare. Phone records showed strange calls made just hours before some attacks. Vehicles linked to Makalala's company had been seen parked near Intercape facilities days before broke out. Anonymous warnings sent to Intercape staff carried phrases identical to those once shouted at drivers by taxi enforcers. The pattern was tightening, and police intelligence officers started quietly building a case. The more they dug, the more Makalala's shadow loomed over every frame of burnt rubber and shattered glass. Still, despite mounting evidence, no arrests were made. Witnesses were too afraid. Some quit their jobs and disappeared entirely, never collecting their final paychecks. Government officials shifted blame, promising action while nothing moved. For Intercape, it was survival by inches, trying to operate while being hunted on the highways they once owned. By late 2023, the streets whispered what the courtrooms hadn't yet said aloud. The attacks weren't accidents, they were orders. The man giving them wasn't hiding. He was building something, an empire of fear stitched into the nation's transport lines. And though the wheels of justice turned slowly, they were now pointed in his direction. In October 2022, the sound of cut through the early morning quiet at a service station in Klapmuts. A man named Zintambila Mediza collapsed beside his car, bleeding out before help could arrive. Witnesses saw no robbery, no argument, just a clean execution that lasted seconds. Police arrived and quickly ruled out theft. His wallet, phone, and watch were untouched. This was not a crime of opportunity, but a message written in bullets. Detectives soon discovered something deeper behind the phone records revealed calls between known taxi enforcers and a number linked to Bonke Makalala's network. Surveillance cameras picked up a suspicious vehicle trailing Mediza for days before his ties began to form between the and a larger pattern of targeted attacks across the region. What looked like a one-off now opened the door to something far more dangerous. Behind closed doors, investigators were already piecing together years of evidence. Bits of information from cases, fire and unexplained disappearances began to form a single dark thread. It pointed not to random chaos, but to a man with motive, manpower, and methods, Bonke Makalala. He wasn't just expanding a taxi business. He was allegedly building an enforcement, a team designed not for growth, but fear. Sources described the group as more than bodyguards. These were men who specialized in threats, extortion, and violence against those who refused to cooperate. Taxi bosses who didn't align with Makalala's interests found their vehicles torched or their drivers beaten. Business owners who refused to pay for protection reported break-ins, vandalism, or worse. The streets whispered that Makalala's success was not only about good timing, but ruthless tactics. Then came the claim that pushed the case into new territory. Intercape, the long-distance bus company under siege, reported direct extortion attempts tied to Makalala's name. Managers recalled conversations warning them to pull back services on the Cape Town to Matata route. The threat was simple: leave the route or suffer the consequences. Intercape refused to back down, and the violence only grew more calculated. As police pressure increased, something changed. A few insiders began talking. Protected by investigators and driven by fear or guilt, former allies of Makalala started offering details. They described meetings in dark taverns, money passed hand to hand, and orders issued like instructions from a general. The crimes once seen as isolated now looked like assignments, each with a target and a message. Intercape, already battered by attacks, decided they'd had enough. In March 2024, they launched a legal case that would shake the entire industry. At the Western Cape High Court, they named Bonke Makalala directly as the man behind the campaign of terror. It was the first time a company dared to publicly accuse a taxi kingpin by name, using real documents and data. This wasn't a press release, it was a legal war. Their lawyers arrived with boxes of evidence, phone logs showing contacts between enforcers and Makalala's known numbers, maps showing the timing and location of attacks, forensic reports tying vehicles to crime scenes. Dockets from older police investigations were reopened, showing patterns missed the first time. The case was no longer based on suspicion. It had a spine made of paperwork and proof. Inside the courtroom, silence fell as the allegations were read out. Reporters scribbled notes as lawyers described a network that extended across provinces. Witnesses, kept anonymous for safety, described extortion threats and near experiences. KINGPIN argued that this wasn't business rivalry, it was organized crime masked as a taxi company. Every route, they claimed, had become a battlefield controlled by fear. News of the court case spread quickly. Other transport companies, long silent in fear, began watching closely. Some considered filing their own charges, others went underground, canceling routes or hiring security. Across South Africa, whispers of the taxi mafia grew louder. The impact reached beyond buses. Local government offices, once quiet about taxi violence, were forced to comment. Political leaders faced questions about why Makalala had operated so freely for so long. Taxi bosses and rival associations stopped answering calls from the press. Some changed phone numbers or moved meetings to new locations. The fear was real and it had a name. But while the court case marked a turning point, Makalala's influence had not disappeared. On the streets, his drivers still ran routes. His businesses still operated under different names. His loyalists still stood guard at key ranks. To many, it seemed like the case had only poked the lion, not caged it. The documents had been filed, but the war was far from over. In December 2023, a police convoy moved through Pretoria just before dawn. They had tracked Bonke Makalala to a quiet house on the city's edge. Inside, the man accused of turning South Africa's roads into battlegrounds was taken without a fight. Officers read out charges that stretched back years: attempted extortion, conspiracy, and illegal firearm possession. The arrest shocked many, but it had been building for months. Behind the scenes, investigators had collected layers of evidence. Phone logs, witness statements, vehicle surveillance, and crime scene forensics all pointed to one name. Prosecutors were ready, calling Makalala the mastermind behind a national transport crime syndicate. His reach, they said, wasn't just through taxis. It touched every corner of the long-distance travel industry. He didn't compete with rivals. He tried to erase them. In custody, Makalala remained calm, but his actions told another story. Days into his stay, he allegedly tried to bribe prison officials with holiday Christmas boxes. Inside were envelopes stuffed with cash, meant to buy special treatment and favors. The offer backfired. Word spread fast, and prosecutors used it as proof of his ongoing influence and disregard for the law. The court denied his bail, citing not only the charges, but the clear risk to public safety. Still, locking him away didn't end the story. In October 2024, police seized 3 Toyota Quantum minibus taxis tied to his company. The vehicles had been spotted near Intercape bus stations during days of attacks. License plates had been swapped. Drivers refused to speak. But inside the engines and bodywork, the truth began to show. Forensic experts found tampered engine numbers and chassis tags. One van's floor panel had been fused to a different vehicle's roof. Permits were either fake or fraudulently obtained, some issued while Makalala was already in jail. Investigators believed these vehicles had been used to track buses, follow drivers, and even carry out ambushes. These weren't just taxis, they were tools in a war. From behind bars, Makalala petitioned the Western Cape High Court to return the seized vehicles. In January 2025, judges dismissed the application without pause. The vehicles were too risky, too corrupted, too close to crime scenes. Their release, the court ruled, would violate road laws and endanger lives. Even in prison, Makalala was still trying to control the streets. Outside the courtroom, the intimidation didn't stop. Intercape drivers began receiving strange phone calls again, silent at first, then full of threats. Some were followed on their way home. Others found slashed tires or broken mirrors. Journalists covering the case reported being stalked after court sessions. Police stations logged complaints, but fear made many victims stay silent. It became clear that Makalala's network hadn't collapsed with his arrest. The structure he built over a decade was still moving in parts. Still loyal, still dangerous. Law enforcement increased patrols near known hotspots. KINGPIN added private security for high-risk routes. But the unease remained. One man was in jail, yet the violence felt far from over. The focus shifted. Investigators began tracing money, looking at business ties and suspicious contracts. Financial records from Makalala Trans showed strange deposits and links to shell companies. Phone data showed repeated calls to low-level government offices. Some officials couldn't explain how operating permits were issued or why investigations had stalled. A new question rose. Who had helped him operate this long? The South African Police Service came under fire. Critics demanded to know why years of attacks hadn't led to earlier arrests. Whistleblowers inside the force hinted that some officers feared Makalala, others were paid to look away. Parliament members called for a formal inquiry. The public was tired of silence. The damage was too big to hide. By early 2025, Makalala's case had become more than a trial. It was a symbol of everything broken in the system. Buses still ran, but fewer people boarded. Fear lived in the shadows of the taxi ranks and behind depot fences. The roads were no longer just routes. They were scars. And the question, echoing across South Africa, wasn't just how Makalala fell, it was how many helped him rise. In early 2025, Bonke Makalala's case became more than a courtroom story. It turned into a national reckoning. Every hearing was watched closely. Journalists lined up outside the Western Cape High Court. Inside, cameras flashed as prosecutors detailed a dark chapter in South Africa's transport history. This was not just about one man. It was about a system that had allowed crime to thrive on the country's roads for years. Makalala, once a taxi driver, had built a name feared by bus operators, rival bosses, and even police. His trial became the symbol of something bigger. Could South Africa finally face the crime buried deep within its transport sector? Advocacy groups saw the trial as a turning point. Civil society backed Intercape, saying the bus company had shown rare courage. For years, others had stayed quiet out of fear. Now, one company was pushing back in court. Their legal battle gave voice to others still suffering in silence. Soon, more companies began to speak. Bus owners stepped forward with stories of threats and forced shutdowns. Trucking companies revealed that they were followed, harassed, and told to avoid key routes. Even rail transport had been threatened, allegedly by taxi-linked gangs looking to control passenger flow and cargo. A pattern emerged, one bigger than Intercape alone. The crisis forced the government to respond. Transport Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga addressed the media, admitting the issue had become national. She promised new security measures and more regulation. But many felt the words came too late. The attacks had already happened. It had already been spilled. In Parliament, the mood turned tense. SAAP's leadership was called in to answer tough questions. Why had they taken so long? Why were known suspects not arrested earlier? Members of Parliament demanded accountability. They wanted to know who had failed and why. For years, Makalala's name had appeared in files, yet he had stayed free. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.